This may seem a little controversial to you, but it wouldn't be right to talk about the labor movement unless you have some controversy involved in it.
Dan Fisher with he's a city council or the city treasurer, been on the council, been a mayor, and is involved with the Gillespie group that's also promoting what we're doing here in town.
The reason Dave asked me to say a few words today, my family on my father's side were present at the founding of the Progressive Mine Workers Union in this building that was behind me in 1932, and later on moved forward into the labor movement for the balance of their lives. So the Progressive Mine Workers, I want you to think about it. Look behind me at this garden that you've heard about and visualize a building that is smaller than the plot of land that we've got. And it's in early September 1st in Illinois, the end of the summer. It's hot. And you got about 300 miners packed into a building that was in poor physical condition. You know, parts of the ceiling were falling down before they got in there. Many of them had been up all night long. They'd come in off shifts, or they had been to the tavern or been working at a second or third job. And they come here because they're mad about the direction their union had taken and had given back hard-earned, hard-fought contract dollars in order to get a nationwide settlement. Now, UMWA District 12, which was Illinois, was perhaps the strongest branch of the union in the entire nation. District 12 had won concessions beyond what other unions had won and had established for themselves a history of being able to put their money where their mouth was, to put their feet on the ground, and to be aggressive in the pursuit of the goals that they had in front of them. And their goals were pretty simple. They wanted a better life for themselves and for their families. That's not that big of a space. You pack a lot of upset, possibly partly intoxicated, unhappy men in a room at the end of an Illinois summer in the heat, and you get fired. And that's what came out of that room. And I think in order to understand history, we have to always put it in context with what we know today. So this may seem a little controversial to you, but it wouldn't be right to talk about the labor movement unless you have some controversy involved in it. I think the group that, if you think about it really, and I thought about this since Dave asked me, who do I think is maybe a good touchstone about what was going on with the progressives at their formation is Black Lives Matter. Only instead of black lives, it's coal miners matter. Think about it. You had largely an immigrant population, first generation, second at best, that came across an ocean because they had to. They had to find a life somewhere, try to earn a living for their families, gave up everything they knew, everything that was dear to them, to come here to try to find a better life. They had sacrificed and done everything imaginable to try to do that, had worked hard. And then the groups that they thought had been their benefactors, the people that had worked for them, their union brothers, they thought sold them down the river in a contract. Gave back all the hard-earned gains that they had made, they thought were washed away for the sake of not making trouble. They were also led in many ways by women, which was not the normal thing back in those days, okay? We've heard about Mother Jones, but the Women's Auxiliary played a dramatic role in the direction that union took and the way it acted and the way it interacted with the community. That's not much different than what you see in Black Lives Matter today. And the third similarity, I think, is they thought that most of the givebacks that they had, that the reason that they were not respected, the reason that no one listened to them, the reason they thought they'd been sold down the river, is that they were part of a permanent underclass. And that this country had turned its back on them. Even though they had dug coal that had lit the lights, powered the trains, done the things that made the Industrial Revolution possible in this country, they thought that the rest of the country took them for granted and left them behind because of who they were, that their life didn't matter. The old adage about if there was a problem in a mine, you saved the mules first because they were more valuable than the miners was real. And that's how these men thought. That's not much different than a lot of people think today. And another part about it is when they interacted with authorities, particularly the police, particularly sheriff's deputies, it didn't turn out too well for them. You know, there was violence perpetrated against these miners where they were killed, murdered, and they responded in kind back with bombings and with knives and other things. It says it on that plaque. But most of the violence was precipitated against them first. And indeed, the formation of the Progressives came after the march down in Mulkytown where they were led into an ambush. So they came back here and said, that's it. That's the last straw. We're going on our own. And they did. And their vision was to have a more democratic, more socially responsible union. Now, they were labeled as communists. In particular, Republican candidates, even back then, zeroed in on them and said they were all leftists. They were progressives. That's where the name came from. And there was their share of socialists and communists. But the thing that they were more than anything else was anti-fascist. Because they saw in John L. Lewis and the autocracy of the United Mine Workers at that time a strong hand that told them what they had to do, and they rebelled against that. They wanted to have the right to make their own decisions, to live their own lives, to feed and take care of their families. And so they came together and they formed a union on that spot. And they did pretty well for a while. But ultimately the forces that they rebelled against, made it less likely that they could succeed in the long run. But we had a 5K race this morning. And as a person who has run a marathon or two in their life, I learned a long time ago, it doesn't matter how fast you go, really. What matters is that you tried and you did your best to finish. And that's what the progressive miners did. They stood up for what they believed in. They wouldn't bow down to the establishment, to the forces against them, which were powerful. And they did it to try to make conditions better for all working men and women in this country. So even though we may not have a Progressive Miners of America today, we should be thankful for what they have done, and we should pay homage to it. Now, before I leave, I want to call your attention to, there's an exhibit in the museum, and I hope you get the time to go there because Dave and the other ones in the museum have really done an exceptional job of making it a truly interesting and important historical site. But there's an exhibit in there about the sit-down strike in Wilsonville. And if you haven't looked at that exhibit, do that today because there's tours going on there. That's another way that the progressives implemented a technique that's common in our lifetime for civil disobedience and protest. Sit-down strike. And for 200 days, the progressives occupied the mine in Wilsonville against the company and in a very real way against partly their own union because the national leadership of the progressives believed that they should settle, that it should be done. But the miners themselves wanted to not give in quite so easily. So another day begat another day, begat another day, begat another day. And the president of the union that walked them out of that mine that day was my great uncle, John Fisher. And here's what John said, as quoted by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch when he comes out. He said, "Our immediate strike is nearly a reversal of a greater struggle that looms in the coal industry on the issue of mechanization. and the consequent efforts on the lives of the people who depend upon mining for a livelihood. Unless greater social and economic reforms are enacted to give miners a greater share of the benefits of mechanization and of their labor and the fruits of it, they will manifest themselves with greater intensity in a broader scale, and I pray for our country. Those words can be said by anybody today, but they were said by my great uncle in 1932. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Sorry about the mic, but that's what I know about the progressives. And this garden here is another example of the spirit that they began when they formed in early September in 32. And I'm very proud of the work that we've done. So that's all I have, and thank you very much, and we're going to have some more music.
Yeah.